There, I've got a story for you today, and I'm kind of excited to tell you this one because I found out that a lot of times this story's not told to first graders, and it's about time that you heard it because why should grown-ups have all the fun with it? Anyway, this story is about Job, and I'll tell you, even though grown-ups have heard this one a lot, uh, they don't always know very much about it. They just know little bits about Job. So, uh, what we think is that Job is probably the first part of the Bible that was written down because up until that time, people would just remember things. They would tell the stories to their children, and the children would learn it. And people were pretty good at remembering the stories. But this one was written down. And so it doesn't talk about the oldest things that ever happened, but it's about the oldest story that was written down. So that gives us a clue that there's something important for us to learn about this because someone saw that was important enough to write down. Now, Job himself lived around the time of the patriarchs, and that really is just a way of saying about the time of Abraham. So that gives you an idea of where he was. So there was not a lot of knowledge about what God wanted from people at that time, but Job was one of these guys who did the best he could with what he knew. And as it starts out, we find that Job is a rich guy, and that doesn't mean money. In those days, being rich meant having a lot of animals and even servants who worked for you. So he had like thousands of camels and oxen, hundreds of donkeys. It's sheep, a lot of sheep, something like 7,000 of them. And he had plenty of servants to help take care of these. And the scene switches from the part where we're told how rich Job is to heaven. And God is there, and the angels have shown up to present themselves to God. We don't know exactly what that means, except that maybe it had something to do with them reporting in, because Satan, the devil, shows up also. You notice he's not considered one of the angels, so there's already something separate about him, and we should keep a close eye on this guy. And he presents himself to God, and God says, "Where have you been?" Satan says, "Well, I've been the earth here and there, back and forth." That sounds a little bit suspicious because he's not really telling what he's been up to. And it's similar to someone catching a child doing something or having seen a child doing something like getting into the cookies that he's told not to get into. And the parent saying, "What are you doing?" And the child says, "Nothing." That's what Satan is doing here. We know he's up to no good. But God presses forth and he says, "Have you considered my servant Job? He's upright. Uh, he's a good guy. He fears God. He shuns evil. What do you think about that?" And I think this is where God is doing something to the devil, and the devil doesn't even know it. The devil seems to get angry about this and says, "Oh, why shouldn't Job be um, obedient to you? You're protecting him. You've blessed him with all these things, and nothing bad ever happens to him." And it says, if you took away Job's things, he would curse you to your face. He would talk bad about you, and he wouldn't like you. And God says, "All right, tell you what, you can take away everything from Job, but you can't lay a finger on him." So the next thing we find out is that Job is out, apparently out with some of um, his servants, maybe some of the family, but not his children, because he had 10 children. He had 7 sons, 3 daughters, and they would have a feast on a regular basis. And afterwards, Job would perform a sacrifice to God just in case one of them had said something or done something that would anger God. and one of those feasts is going on right now. Well, suddenly a messenger shows up and tells Job, "Oh, the Sabaeans, they came in and they raided where your oxen were plowing, and they took all the oxen away, and there were donkeys grazing there, and they took those away, and they killed all of your other servants except for me. I'm the only one who got away." And what he's talking about is the servants who were in charge of the oxen and the donkeys. Job's trying to get a grip with this when another servant shows up and says, "Oh, the fire of God fell from the sky, and all your sheep have been burned up." And all of the other servants who were taking care of the sheep, they died too. I was the only one who got away. Then Job's still trying to get hold of this, and another servant shows up and he goes, "The Chaldeans swept in and they stole all of the camels, and they killed everybody who was taking care of the camels." And while this is happening, the next servant shows up and he says, "Job, this great wind came out of the desert and it hit the corners of the house where your children were having their feast, and it collapsed. The whole house collapsed in and killed every one of them. And the servants who were in there, I just happened to be outside and I got away from it." And Job is overwhelmed by this. He has just lost everything he has, and he's lost his children. And he tears his clothes. That's a way that they would show that they were upset in those days. And he doesn't know what to say. Well, it doesn't help because um, his wife then um, it shows up, and they are going to mourn together. But the scene changes. We end up seeing what's going on in heaven again. And it sounds just like a little while before. The angels show up and present themselves to God, and Satan does the same thing. And God says to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? He is upright, he is blameless, he shuns evil, he follows me, he fears me." And Satan again falls for what God is presenting to him. And he's going skin for skin. And said, "A man will give up everything he owns in order to be safe." And God says, you know, uh, "Job follows me, even though you incited me to take the protection away from him." He says, "All right, you may do anything you want to him, but you cannot kill him." Well, at this, God could easily have pointed out that uh, Satan had said, "Oh, he's going to curse you to your face if you take away his things." And Job didn't do it. But this time, Satan is again saying, "Oh, he'll curse you to your face if I am able to get my hands on him." God lets him. Of course, Satan is not allowed to kill him. But what he does to Job is awful. He causes sores to be on his body, so he hurts. It must itch too, because when we find Job, he is sitting on the ground. He's got a broken piece of pottery and he's scraping his skin with it. I guess he's trying to get some kind of relief. And his wife is saying, "Oh, just go ahead and yell at God and get angry at him and curse him and go ahead and die." Job says, "You're talking foolishly. Listen, we won't accept the bad with the good. You're not making any sense." So Job has not sinned. The next thing we know, three of his friends show up and they sit with him for 7 days. Now, that is a great thing to do when someone is upset, especially with grown-ups. It's okay to just sit with them. If you know they're sad or upset, you sit with them and you don't have to say anything. Um, I guess sometimes that could work with children too. Um, but usually it's a lot easier to comfort children in the sense that you can hug and talk to them. So they do this for 7 days. They just sit with him, and that's great. Trouble is, after the 7 days, Job starts talking, and he's going, it's awful that I was even born. I don't know. I didn't do anything wrong. Well, then his friends make it worse because they said, God doesn't punish people unless they've done something wrong. And you had to have done something wrong and you need to admit it before something worse happens. And this goes back and forth for a long time. And there's even another guy who shows up, and everybody's trying to say what God does and what God doesn't do without really knowing enough about God to say those kind of things. Because remember, they don't have the Bible to look to and be able to read and find out what God has actually said. So they know some things about God, but they don't know everything about him. So eventually it gets to the point where Job's trying to tell his friends, no, I didn't do anything wrong. If God were here, I would tell him, I would make my argument. I could tell him I didn't do anything wrong and I don't understand what's happening. Well, finally, God has heard enough, and he steps in. He starts talking to Job. Now, there's a storm going on, so they don't actually see God himself, and they know it's God. There's no doubt about that. And he goes, okay, Job, you've had questions for me. I have questions for you. He said, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Hmm, something Job can't answer. How did I measure out the dimensions? How did I decide how to do everything? Um, what can you tell me about the animals? Where does the snow come from? He said, have you walked the paths of the ocean? And the great deep meaning, have you walked along the bottom of the ocean? He said, have you been with a deer when it's given birth? He's throwing out all these questions, and Job realizes very quickly, I have been saying things I should not have said anything. And he said, oh, I cover my mouth. I should never have talked like that. Well, God's not finished. He lays out question after question. In fact, the way I counted them out, there were 69 questions that God gives. Job cannot answer any of them. But in the end, after he has taught Job his lesson, he turns to Job's friends and says to them, you have done wrong. You have spoken of me in a way that you should not. So you ask Job to do a sacrifice for you, and I will forgive you. So in the case, they were speaking incorrectly about God, so they were in big trouble. Now, Job had to be straightened out from what he was saying because he thought he had the right to question God. And afterwards, Job realizes who he is and who God is, and his not needing to question God. But we're given a special bit of information. See, Job never knows that the devil was behind this. Job never finds out in all of this Satan was wrong, that people are worth the value God gives to them. We find out sometimes when things happen to us, it's not because of bad things we've done. Sometimes we make bad decisions and bad things will happen. But it could also be the devil is trying to get us to do wrong, or he's trying to do something to us to get somebody else to do wrong. And that's important to remember. So I will leave you with this lesson for today, and I will show you today's tie is the Tasmanian devil. The devil's behind all of this that happened, but you may not recognize it. So this is the warning for us to look for it when bad things happen. All right, I hope you have a good day, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.